explosion 25 years later. We about to get that explosion up in this piece. Let's do it.
Steam locomotives are one of the most elegant and beautiful types of machinery man has ever created. Some say all their sounds make you feel like they were living beasts within a steel jacket. A steam locomotive works like this. Fuel is put into the firebox and burns to create heat. This fuel can be either coal, oil, or even wood. The smoke is channeled through the funnel or the smokestack. In the boiler, there's water, usually provided by the tender, and when the water gets heated by the heat of the firebox, it turns into steam. The steam then gathers up into the steam dome, and when the engineer pulls the throttle, a valve in the steam dome is lifted.
And it'd be like,
travels into the piston chamber. The steam forces the pistons back, and when it reaches the edge, the pressure pushes the piston the other way. The piston also moves the connecting rods on the drive wheels, and the train moves.
Does it ever feel like it's overheating?
The used steam is then
it looks like
shot
it's
up
like
the
it's
funnel
overheating.
along with the firebox smoke, creating the famous
Oh man, this animation
sound
got me thinking of watching Schoolhouse Rock, and I love Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bear, yes I'm running a bear. Hope I raise that to
While they may
but
sound very
today
simple to
I am
operate,
still
steam
just a
locomotives
bear.
need careful care, and you need to maintain a perfect balance.
Who hasn't
of
seen that,
steam
seriously?
pressure, heat, and water. If there's too little heat and lots of water, the water can't be turned into steam and make the engine move. Not dangerous, but it does make you look like the laughingstock of the railroad, or there's something wrong with the boiler.
And you're not getting paid,
However,
man.
There's too little water in the boiler. With lots of heat, the boiler will overheat. The metal walls will soften and crack and eventually explode
Like that.
with enough force to level a city block.
And you're gonna look like the Hindenburg afterwards.
Thankfully, boiler explosions weren't as common as train derailments over the years, and even today, thousands of steam locomotives have been preserved, with several of them in running order on tourist railroads or operating
That's kinda
on the
surprising,
main
actually,
line
that
on
that's not as
special
common.
excursions. However, there would be one accident that would change steam locomotive preservation forever.
And it started with an ad. Get your dreads out of my face. Think you look cute. You look feminine. Look like the girl from Living Single.
Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, June 16th, 1995.
Is this
Not
the same
far from
Gettysburg
site
as
of
the Gettysburg
famous
Address?
Civil War
I assume
battle
so.
Lies the Gettysburg Railroad. Running from Gettysburg to Biglerville, this former Reading
Biglerville?
Railroad line played a
That
key role
sounds
during
like
the
a
battle.
cartoon.
Gettysburg Station was also the very
No
site President
disrespect.
Lincoln gave his famous Gettysburg Address.
Hey, there it is.
Abandoned by the
Called
Reading
it.
Railroad in 1976 when they got merged with Conrail, the Gettysburg Railroad was organized in October of 1976 as a tourist railroad. There were quite a few locomotives that ran this line, mainly their steam engines, like 76.
That chick just trying to hold it up like,
Frisco 280 built
oh,
by
I got you, man.
Another
I got
Bronco
you.
280, number 38, built for the Huntington and Broad Top Mountain Railroad.
Southern, CN.
Finally, 1278, a former Canadian Pacific G5D 462 Pacific, built in April of 1948 by the Canadian Locomotive Company.
More! No!
On June 16th,
Bars!
1995, 1278 was going to run 3 excursions up and down the line. The third and last train of the day was the Summer Eve dinner excursion
I've
from
been
Holly Springs
working
and
on
back.
the rail.
There were 3 crewmen in 1278 and
long
on the 6-car train. 48-year-old engineer James Cornell, 18-year-old first fireman Christopher Miller, and second fireman 32-year-old Eddie Shera, who would relieve Miller midway into the journey and assist whenever needed. The passengers would ride the train to Mount Holly Springs and would have a catered 2-hour dinner at local restaurants before they returned to Gettysburg.
You will be
After the
challenging,
train left
fighting
Gettysburg,
you
the co-owner and
inside
operator of Gettysburg Passenger
Wolf
Service
Pits.
Incorporated, who used the Gettysburg Railroad's equipment, closed the station, and followed the excursion. The purpose of her chase with her car was to provide a contingency service to the train and, if necessary, limited emergency transportation if something went wrong. She carried a cell phone and a two-way radio that she used to monitor and talk to the crew. Her husband, the engineer, also carried a radio and cell phone.
As one would.
Conductor and passenger service personnel on the train also had two-way radios.
We all had radios
Near
pretty much.
Aspers at milepost 15.
Did anybody have iHeartRadio?
The dinner train stopped and
25
waited
years
to
ago?
receive
Yeah,
a helper
nobody
train
had
to push them up the hill, which consisted of a diesel locomotive pulling 4 freight cars.
In fact, back then
It is
the idea of a
unknown
phone
which
playing her
diesel
music
assisted
was
1278
blasphemy.
that day. It took several minutes to couple the helper to the rear of the dinner train, after which the combined consist proceeded. Believe it or not, this was a routine procedure on the Gettysburg. Already, there was the first sign of danger. A check water heater pump in the boiler had been leaking all day, even though the valve was recently replaced.
Oh, dang!
On the previous trip that
Anybody
day,
fixed it?
when 1278 was running backward next to a double-tiered open-air observation car, the spray from the leaking check valve required that the top half of the car to be cleaned. Consequently, according to the first fireman, when the train left Wolf Pit, the feed pump
You stop all that
shut
smoking,
off.
dude.
The feed water heater
Who you-
is a
who you
heat
hollering at?
exchanger located in the front of the locomotive,
What'd you say?
usually in the smoke box.
Come say it to my.
Steam
Come closer. Come closer. Come closer. Say that to my
is used
face.
to preheat water from the tender
Oh,
before water is
we
pumped
can't
into
take
the
it in the
boiler.
car.
This boosts efficiency and lowers fuel usage. The second fireman testified that when he relieved the first fireman, the feed pump was still off. The second fireman said he then turned the feed pump on all the way. When both firemen were later asked how they could tell whether the feed pump was working or not, they both said that the sound and visual movement of the feed pump rod told them that it was working. Both firemen felt that such cues were normal and sufficient to ensure that the water was flowing into the boiler. However, it would later be revealed that this was not the correct procedure.
I think he got something in
Both
his mouth.
firemen stated that they checked the water glass frequently during the trip, which would indicate how much water is left in the boiler. The first fireman stated that he always checked the water glass, and the second fireman said he checked it once every 5 minutes or so. He also said that the engineer leaned back in his seat to check the water glass about 3 times during the trip.
Yo, this is my whip!
Neither fireman noted
This is my whip!
about the level of the water in the glass. They said that it appeared to be normal and that it would fluctuate between half to a full inch. Which they considered normal considering the grade of the track and the vibrations.
Feel the vibration.
Road, at milepost
I'm just saying random stuff while this man is talking about important stuff about trains.
At 7 p.m.
Honestly, I don't understand most of the stuff going on.
The train was moving at approximately 15 miles an hour. Disaster struck.
And it started with an ad.
It's a real blessing to work with my
Oh, it's
family.
Dickies.
I want things to symbolise stability, foundations.
I'm not worried about your pants.
For those who love peanut butter, and
I'm not in the mood for Reese's right now. Leave me alone. Somebody got shot! Who got shot? Was it you, Gladys?
1278 suffers a backdraft explosion in the firebox. Scalding steam
Did you say
and flames
backdraft?
burned the 3
That's not a good thing. Power Rangers have went through that
with
before.
the engineer suffering the worst, as he had burns over 60% of his body. When the train stopped, the engineer managed
How
to
did
get
just
down
1%
out of the
of your body
locomotive
is
cab
bad?
by himself, and he laid on the ground.
0.1%
Then helped by the
is
firemen
bad.
and other members of the train crew. Ambulances arrived minutes later
You
to
ever get
take them to area
seriously? You ever
hospitals.
get stung by
First fireman, who had immediately left the
say
locomotive
if
cab
a
by
grill-
the doorway, had second
if your
and
arm
third-degree
touched
burns
a
over
grill,
10% of his
even
body.
for like a bit of a
He was
second,
taken to the hospital in
and it gets that sting,
Gettysburg
it's like getting
and
stung
was
by a
later
bee.
transferred to York for a
it's
week.
irritating.
His recovery took about 1.5 months. The second fireman
And it
also
may go
had
away
second
soon,
and
it may
third
not.
degree burns on both his legs, arms, and chest, and had fractured legs when he jumped through the locomotive cab window. Thankfully, none of the crew were killed, and the passengers on the train escaped serious injury, all 100 of them. 1278 suffered major damage to its firebox area, but the rest of the locomotive
This is like
was
a
fine.
beehive.
The crown sheet toward the front of the locomotive
from the
next to the rear
1800s,
tube sheet knuckle had bulged downward
or
a
at
maximum
least
of
the
about a
1930s
foot
at the
in
most,
a bag
or
shape
earliest.
that covered an area encompassing about 60 crown stays. The crown sheet holes around the crown stays have been deformed and elongated, creating gaps about the crown stay heads. The crown sheet knuckle next to the flue sheet had a 6-inch tear, and also 2 front right firebox grate panels of the firebox floor had broken and
I don't
fallen
know what I'm
onto
doing.
the ash pan
Leave me alone.
below. An investigation quickly revealed that the crown sheet overheated due to low water levels, but it would soon be discovered that this accident was more than just an engine not having enough water. 1278 was found to be poorly maintained, from an air compressor that sounded like an asthmatic cow, to exterior rust on the drive wheels. Not to mention the fact that
Seems like I look up
many
asthmatic. I
gauges
assume
were
that
removed
relates
and
to
not
asthma,
replaced,
which I would know.
including the one that indicated water flow to the feed water pump. The engineer told the NTSB that he had removed the original feed pump gauge after it had failed, and the replacement also failed, so he didn't
asthma.
bother replacing it with a third one.
Yeah,
As for the
asthmatic cow. That
gauges
sounds
still
about
left
right.
on the engine, they were mostly, in fact, wrong, particularly the water glass. The water glass is a simple gauge that indicated how much water is left in the boiler. The first issue was the water glass light was not working, a violation of railroad regulations of steam locomotive operation. The second was the crew thought the water was at an acceptable level, even though the water glass level changed by only half an inch, which should have indicated something was wrong. Normal fluctuations are normally between 2 to 4 inches, and the fluctuations can also be present depending on track conditions. When the water glass was removed, the NTSB suspicions were correct. The water glass pipes and valves were obstructed by almost 85% of solid scale, blocking the water flow to indicate the correct water levels. Plus, not many of the employees of the railroad, including the crew on board that day, knew how to properly blow down the water glass, a procedure that would highlight issues, including a clog in the water glass pipes. Only the owner of the Gettysburg Railroad, the engineer's father, demonstrated the correct method of blowing the glass down. All the Gettysburg passenger service employees have been taught by the engineer. No one said